Resuming debate, reprise du débat. The honourable member for Selkirk-Interlake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's indeed a pleasure to be able to rise and speak on Bill C-38, the Economic Action Plan for 2012. And I do want to do a little bit of a contrast between what our Conservative government is doing in our budget and what the Manitoba NDP is doing in their provincial budget. Now, first of all, one thing I'm very glad to see in the federal budget and Economic Action Plan 2012 was the mention of further funding for Lake Winnipeg and to support our initiatives for clean water, clean air, and clean land. Overall, we've been investing for the past 4 years through the Lake Winnipeg Basin Initiative, which included the Lake Winnipeg Water Stewardship Fund, which really helped community-based projects. It assisted with a pile of science and research that looked at reducing algae, reducing nutrient loads in Lake Winnipeg, and making sure that we have less beach closures due to contamination as a result of municipal runoff, agricultural runoff, and natural nutrient loads that we see in Lake Winnipeg and throughout the entire watershed. And of course, Mr. Speaker, that watershed carries on not just immediately around Lake Winnipeg. It includes almost the entire province of Manitoba, almost all of North Dakota, half of Minnesota, a little bit of South Dakota, all of the southern prairies, including Saskatchewan and Alberta, so as well as northwestern Ontario, all flow into Lake Winnipeg. So it was a $14 million project over 4 years that really invested heavily through Environment Canada into the scientific community, working with academics at universities throughout the watershed, and made those changes. Unfortunately, you look at the Manitoba NDP provincial budget, it's completely mute on any new initiatives to protect Lake Winnipeg, to reduce those nutrient loads, and to ensure that we can move ahead for a healthy rural economy and have a good fishery in Lake Winnipeg. Now, one of the things that we have been talking about throughout Bill C-38 is the changes to the Fisheries Act, and really how those focus on improving the approval of drainage projects through rural Canada, especially those around agricultural lands. All too often, municipalities and farmers have been dealing with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Mr. Speaker, and had seen nothing but delay after delay after delay to do things as simple as cleaning out a ditch, replacing a culvert, replacing a crossing on a provincial drain, making sure a drain is expanded to handle the excess moisture that could be falling in agriculture areas from time to time, because they always classified that as fish habitat. Well, we know it's not fish habitat because most of the year those drains and ditches and culverts are sitting dry. There isn't a fish in them. So this now removes that burden from the federal fisheries, allows them to focus on actual fish habitat, being rivers, creeks, and lakes, and making sure that any projects that are occurring in those natural habitats are done quicker, in making sure that the assessments are done in an expedient process so that we can have those projects done in an environmentally sensitive manner, that we are enhancing and protecting fish habitat, and not providing over-encumbersome processes on municipalities and farmers in conducting their drainage projects. Now, my area, Selkirk-Interlake, has been hit extremely hard over the past 5 years by excess moisture, and so this is a critical issue that we want to address, and we are doing it through the federal budget. Now, in Manitoba, what have they done? Well, they got enhanced permit processes happening through water stewardship, more delays happening for the things like lagoons and grey water from farmyards and farm houses, making it more difficult for people to live in rural Manitoba, and that just doesn't fly very far when I represent a rural area, and most people are getting quite perturbed by the attack on rural Manitobans that the provincial NDP have done. Now, this, of course, all relates to flood protection. I'm glad in Economic Action Plan 2012 and Bill C-38, we are increasing funding for permanent flood mitigation efforts by $99 million over the next 3 years. That's available to the provinces and territories, and particularly concentrating on making sure that we have flood mitigation in place to deal with the flooding that we experienced in 2011. So whether it was the flooding that we saw in the Richelieu Valley in Quebec, whether it was the excess flooding that we've seen in southern Manitoba and southern Saskatchewan, or the excessive flooding that we're still experiencing along Lake Manitoba in my riding, this will help the provinces and the municipalities build those permanent dikes, put in place proper controls and infrastructure to protect farmland, to protect property, and to ensure that cottage owners and people that live in those beautiful, pristine areas along our lakes and rivers have the protection that they deserve, and the same type of protection that they've been able to get if they lived in urban centers, especially like the city of Winnipeg. You know, this is an addition to all the money that we've already are going to be pouring into Manitoba through the disaster financial assistance arrangements that we have in place. We're going to be paying, you know, on the eligible expenses, you know, based upon the size of the flooding and the cost of that flood mitigation that we've seen in Manitoba. Over 90% of those costs will be coming from the federal treasury because the province of Manitoba has complained so much that they've been overburdened with the cost of the flooding. We even did a cash advance of $50 million to help them pay for those upfront costs and help mitigate and help homeowners and farmers and communities, municipalities deal with all the excess costs that they had in dealing with the flood last year. And but you know, they essentially haven't really given us any credit for doing that. They continue to complain and saying that their costs and their budget shortfall of $930 million is because of the budget. Well, or because of the flood, and we know that their flooding costs have only been just over $300 million to date. It's actually been cash out of pocket for in the province of Manitoba. And their own budget this year is actually an admission of mismanagement, that they've had to hire more adjusters to go out there. It's a year after the fact, and they still haven't gone out there and finalized claims. People are still waiting for their money. Municipalities are still not paid for the damage that was done and the roads that were replaced and the dikes that were built. And it's just too little, too late from the Manitoba NDP government. Now, I do want to talk about one of the things that I'm very proud of is that over the years, since we've been government, we've been reducing the GST. We've been reduced the GST from 7% to 6% to 5%. And that has been a huge help to taxpayers, to consumers, and of course keeping the cost of everything lower because of all the mitigating increases that happen every time you put into place a tax. It just keeps snowballing out of control. But what does the provincial NDP do? Well, if you really look at what we've done on just gas, on $1.25 a litre gas, by reducing the cost of that gas by 2%, it's created a 2.5 cent per litre savings for Manitobans. But what did Stan Struthers do in the last provincial NDP government budget? Well, he's put in place a gas tax of 2.5 cents per litre. That is a tax grab, taking away that savings that we've been passing on to Manitobans and indeed to all Canadians. And really, because everybody has to drive, this is highway robbery. This is exactly what's happening in Manitoba. It's unfairly hurting seniors and those living on fixed incomes, and it's a direct attack and assault on rural Manitobans because they have to drive the farthest and the most often, and they're going to be carrying that burden. You know, the other thing I wanted to point out, Mr. Speaker, is the income tax difference. We have continued to introduce tax measures that reduce the amount of taxes Manitobans and Canadians are paying. Now, I want to look at an average income tax of $40,000. Well, 1999, the year that the provincial NDP came to power, the federal tax at that time was 17% on the first $29,590 and 26% on the next $10,410. So the total payable federal income tax at that time was $7,736. Well, in Manitoba, the tax at that time was 48.5% of what the federal tax was. So in that case of paying $7,736, you would pay $3,752 as your provincial tax. Now, Premier Selinger, who was the Minister of Finance at the time, delinked the provincial tax from the federal tax. So if you look at last year, year 2011, the federal tax paid, we've reduced it now to 15% on personal income. The tax bracket has been moved up, so it's 15% on the entire $40,000. So you'd owe $6,000 in federal income tax. The Manitoba tax paid, though, since they delinked it, is 10.8% on the first $31,000 you make and 12.7% on the remaining $9,000 out of $40,000. So that's a total provincial tax due of $4,495.
The honourable member from Vaudreuil-Soulanges is
Sir,
resident.
I fail to see the relevance to Bill C-38. This member is speaking clearly about things in another house, the Manitoba legislature, I believe. That doesn't have relevance to this bill, Mr. Speaker.
As this member and others will be no doubt aware, members are routinely given latitude in terms of the issue of relevance. This is particularly true when this House is dealing with the throne speech and the budget, and I've heard there have been many references to the excuse me, to the scope of this bill, and I would encourage all members to speak of things that are related to the bill, realizing how broad it is.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that ruling. And I know this makes the member across the way uncomfortable, but I want to talk about how Manitobans are feeling after the federal budget came down and the provincial budget, and just doing the comparison so people understand, especially in Manitoba, but right across Canada, about the dangers of an NDP government. Yep. So let's just keep moving on here. So as I said, in 2011, federal tax due would be $6,000 at a 15% personal income tax rate. The Manitoba tax is just shy of $4,500. So the taxpayer in Manitoba is actually, because of the tax reductions, just on, we're not talking about all the different tax credits we introduced, you know, whether they're getting tax reductions because of their age, or they're getting increased tax reductions because of children and education and sports. What we're talking about is just the reduction in the bracket creep, and also the reduction in the personal income tax base. So the taxpayer in Manitoba is enjoying a savings in federal income tax of $1,736. That's down 22.5%. However, they are paying $743 more in provincial income tax. That's up almost 20%. So if you look at it, so instead of enjoying a tax savings of $2,578, thanks to the Manitoba NDP in Manitoba, they're only enjoying a $993 reduction in the personal income taxes. So that's a personal tax grab of $1,585 by Stan Struthers and Premier Sellinger.
Hands in your pocket.
Now, you know, we hear a lot that they need the money because they aren't getting enough money from Ottawa. Well, in this budget, we are maintaining our transfers to the province. Since we came to power, we have increased our overall contributions to the province of Manitoba by $648 million. Wow. That's an increase from under the Liberals of $2.7 billion from the federal Liberals to now what us as federal Conservatives are giving them $3.4 billion. It's a huge increase. The problem is in Manitoba, they don't have a revenue problem. They've increased taxes. They're getting more money from the federal government. They have a spending problem. Now, the reason I do this is because I want to talk about the dangers of what the NDP policies present to us and what they want to do to the federal budget. And really what I think sums it up best is that in today's Winnipeg Sun, Sean Hutton wrote a letter, and it says, for anyone out there who's crazy enough to envision a national NDP government, take a look at the disaster they've created in Manitoba. Who's crazy enough to want that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions?